Thank you to everyone who's joining us for our little webinar here around the security gap coverage for the rapidly evolving mobile threat landscape. This is a topic really geared for anything inside of mobile security or any industry for mobile security, but today we will be talking specifically around some of our key insights and learnings in the medical world, that being the connected medical device world, and how we can help as Imperium to secure mobile applications that exist inside of that environment. So just as a quick round of introductions for myself and Andrew, who will be your speakers today. My name is Eric Kalos. I've been with Imperium for a little over 8 years now. So in that time, for me, it's all mobile security, from helping customers to understand how to solve for mobile risk, whether it's the devices in their employees' hands or the mobile applications they're building. So hopefully today we have a good, insightful conversation for you lined up, which I believe we do. And I'll pass it to Andrew to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Snyder. I'm based in Northern California. I've been with Imperium for about 2 years, but with this technology stack for about 7. And yeah, have got a lot of experience working with companies in this space. And hopefully we can share some expertise as well as where we think the market is going. And that's why hopefully you're here. And we're definitely, as with all things, we do have a certain amount of information that we want to cover, but we'd love any questions that might be top of mind for anyone. We'd be happy to answer those as part of the call, or if we run out of time, we'd be happy to answer them afterwards. So again, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andrew. So as we transition over, we're really going to jump right into this rapidly evolving mobile threat landscape. But as we do that, one of the things that we want to talk about, or just add context to this conversation, is around where mobile's starting to fit inside of the connected medical device world. So any industry that you're in nowadays, there's some sort of mobile component, whether it's already established, like mobile banking applications or finance apps or healthcare applications. And now mobile apps may not, if they're not there already, then they're emerging. There's projects that are starting where it's like, hey, how are we going to run this on a mobile device? How can we run this on a tablet? These are some of the conversations and the feedback that I'm getting from some of the shows that we're attending, such as your HISAC events and your connected medical device security events. This is what really the topic of conversation becomes. It seems that there's always some sort of project that involves mobile. And so when you involve mobile, or you introduce mobile to some sort of project or part of the tech stack for something that you're building, it does introduce the risks that exist on mobile. So now there has to be that consideration for, well, what's out there? What do I need to be concerned about? In healthcare, right, you have an application that may permit a patient to book some sort of appointment with a doctor or the primary care physician. It may actually give them access to sensitive data, PII, PHI data around the patient, and some of their maybe some of the lab tests that they just ran at the office. Now they're seeing the results, and that's permitted access on their mobile application. That's kind of where I felt like I first started seeing healthcare apps pop up. Now, as I kind of look closer into this connected medical device world, well, you have these connected medical devices that are worn by patients. Let's say things that monitor levels of glucose, or cardio rhythmic activity or brain activity. These connected devices were transmitting that data back to a mobile app, so that people like the physician or the doctor could see the data coming back out of their patient. The patient could even see those things inside of an app that was available to them on their device. These at kind of the beginning stages were really a display. But now, as we talk to our customers, the realization is that these are becoming less displays and actually more critical to the operation of the device. That being said, we can almost call them controllers. They actually help control the device and actually send calls to the device to take some sort of action, such as I'm measuring your glucose levels, or I'm recognizing as I'm monitoring those glucose levels that you do need some sort of insulin injection. And now I'm going to communicate to the device that's connected to your body to inject you with some insulin to keep levels accurate and keep you healthy, really. So as we start to look at the complexity of these tech stacks, and we realize mobile is becoming more important, that's why we have to start considering the risks on mobile even more so. So again, what we want to do today is start talking about the rapidly evolving mobile threat landscape, what we see are the trends that start to assess or to take care of that risk, and hopefully minimize the risk to the application, the technology, and the patients as well. So I will pass it to Andrew to see if he wants to talk a little bit about some of these recent headlines. I love this slide because I update it almost every time we have a webinar presentation. Pretty easy to go find headlines that look like these are all around mobile, but I don't know if Andrew wanted to speak to any of these or mention anything else as well on top of what I just said.
Yeah, no, good comments, Eric. I mean, this is a space where healthcare is a little bit different than like a bank, right? People break into banks to steal money, whereas with healthcare, there may be people that are trying to do something malicious, but then there's also some folks that are just either curious or they're essentially trying to hack their own device to give themselves better care. Now, needless to say, the companies that are producing these devices and applications have a strong desire to not allow this to happen. And one of the nice or interesting things about security is it never ends. It's one of those things that you think you're secure one moment and the next day there could be an exploit or a target. And so one of the things we're going to be talking about a little bit later is what the current state of the world requires at the pace and speed of technology right now. You know, even in being in the mobile security space for a number of years, there's still every week, every month, some significant bug or exploit or story that says, well, something bad was found, someone didn't anticipate a challenge or an attack, and now someone is affected or infected. In the medical space, it matters because they literally could be infected or they could have therapies delivered inappropriately. And that is what our customers care most about, is they both have to have a security posture that is appropriate for the current moment, as well as a plan to resolve exploits or attacks as they occur over a long period of time. And so that's what I wanted to contribute to this slide. But Eric, I'll let you chime in if you had anything you wanted to call out as well.
Yeah, you know, all of these headlines are troubling and they're eye-popping, and we could talk about each of these in some more detail. But I think something that sticks out to me is that how close in time all of these headlines really are. I mean, these are all about 45 to 60 days apart. That, you know, the rate of change, the rate of these things happening is actually pretty alarming, because all of these are, again, pretty significant headlines, and they're no more than 45 to 60 days apart. The most recent one that you see up there is actually up at the top as a true headline, but that just happened last week, where Kaspersky Lab disclosed that some of their employees were targeted with what they're calling triangulation malware, which is targeted on iOS devices. And you know, first thing I'd like to mention is, yes, that's true. iOS devices can be hacked. iOS devices are not impervious to threats. They're just as vulnerable as an Android device. I'd be happy to debate that subject with anyone. The data is there on my side, and it's open for all to see. But this headline, I think it just exemplifies what we see almost every day. And there's multiple iOS exploit headlines on this slide here. But in the sense of triangulation, it was a zero-click exploit sent to an iOS device, thinking it came through an iMessage, texted to a device. It came attached with an exploit that exploited a vulnerability in the iOS operating system, or the Apple operating system, gave access or connected back to a command and control server, which sent down malware, which became an advanced persistent threat that gave remote access to the device, which then cleared the message, cleared the exploit, and now they're just operating in the background, totally unbeknownst to the user of the device. And again, if you're not using some sort of detection software on your iOS device, you likely as an enterprise have no idea this is happening. The way that Kaspersky noticed there was some sort of issue is they recognized that there was a lot of, I think they just in plain terms recognized just some weird activity coming from the iOS devices connected to their network, because this happened not just on one iOS device, but actually multiple iOS devices. So it's a really interesting attack. You hate to see anyone attacked or hit with a cyber attack, but it's just fascinating to look at the complexity of this attack. This was once thought to be just this, this thing that only happened to significant individuals like your Jeff Bezos, who was targeted with a similar type attack via WhatsApp vulnerability a couple of years ago. And that was all stemming from the NSO group we see down there listed at the bottom with Pegasus spyware. That's, previously back in 2018, they had the Pegasus, spyware was announced to the world as a detected attack in the wild, and now it's come on this way, and it's still available as an exploit or remote exploit on iOS devices and Android. But they were thought to be the only ones. But then here comes Sweet Cure Dreams, who you see the headline there on the left side of the screen. That's another spyware provider. I think they've since said that they're just going to go out of business, but they created a similar exploit. Like it's not just this thing that's going to go away. It's only going to become more commercialized. And I would venture to say much easier to obtain this type of targeting software. So it's not. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, no, and to sort of focus it on this space, this is from our perspective, this is where your threat landscape has expanded beyond a very tightly controlled healthcare or medical device managed lockdown system to it can run on Eric's phone to control his whatever. That is a much broader landscape of risk that needs to be understood and managed. And frankly, it's been a challenge for relatively slow-moving industries like the medical device industry to move at the pace of technological change. And so that creates this gap. And that creates this space where there's both risk and yet need for tools that can help the business. So Eric, why don't we continue and we'll talk about some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is soon to be a dated slide. We have a new global mobile threat report coming out, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'd imagine. But one of the eye-popping numbers that we had here from our last report was 5,000 new mobile malware samples uncovered daily by Zimperium. I mean, it's almost unimaginable, but that is the data. That is the real data that from, again, this is from our sensors across hundreds of millions of mobile devices across the globe. That's what we're seeing as being detected by the Zimperium detection engine on these devices. I mean, that is a staggering number, and that is almost makes you question is how in the world are we going to keep up with this threat landscape if bad actors are producing 5,000 new global malware variants a day or global malware samples a day. And then you look at the headlines and how quickly those things are popping up on the previous slide. So again, it's not just about the severity of the attack. We know how bad these things can be, but it's the rate of change, how quickly these pieces of targeted malware are being created. So as you move into mobile, it's always good to understand the landscape. We talked about malware, we talked about exploits, but really as we narrow it down, I think the industry narrows it down this way. There's really 4 key vectors of attack on a mobile device. There's device threats that mean, that being your exploits, your operating system exploits that we just talked about, such as the one used in triangulation, the ones used by the NSO spyware, Pegasus, Stagefright on Android, similar scenario. That's the ultimate goal of an attacker, is to get an advanced persistent threat on a device, get a foothold on a device, and then expand. And that would be your device attack. And there's different ways that you can do it. As we know, these mobile devices rely on connectivity to function. I mean, that's quite literally how they become smart devices. They connect to the network and enable them to get access to data. Well, these devices also beacon out to these networks, and sometimes these networks are not safe. My device will automatically try to connect me to a network, regardless of whether or not that network is real or safe. It just tries to recognize something and connect to it. That leaves me vulnerable on my device and leaves the things I do on my device potentially susceptible to breach. And that could be anything like text messages or emails to someone, or it could be sensitive healthcare data on my application. So obviously there's ways to mitigate the risks on the network side of these devices. Those network device, if I was to connect to a bad network, and now someone's running a man-in-the-middle attack on my device via the network. Now they control the network traffic flow, and I'm trying to go to some web page on Safari, and they've redirected me to a landing page that they've created that has directed me to download some sort of virus scanning application according to the rules of my office or my employer. Okay, well, let's say I'm going to download that, or if they've social engineered it in such a way that I'm believing it, I'm downloading now malware to my device. Now I have an app on my device that's malicious, and that malicious app could execute malicious code. It could start to communicate back to a command and control server, try to hook other applications on the device. Once that application is now on the device, which came from a network attack, they're starting to get more of a foothold on the device. This is really where the fun starts for them, and the dangers really start to begin for us as unaware users of our device with cyber attacks going on in the background. A phishing attack could deliver it the same way, whether it's a phishing link via email or a messaging app like WhatsApp or WeChat, or as we saw in triangulation, a text message or an iMessage that comes with an exploit, or could come with a phishing link. I think one of the more recent enterprise security breaches that happened via mobile was the Trellio, or what was it again? What's the name of the company again, Andrew? Is Trulia? I don't know why.
It's here. It's about 40 miles that way.
Yeah. Well, regardless of name.
Twilio.
Yeah, sorry. So an IT admin receives a text message link saying, "Hey, or a text message saying, "Hey, I need you need to access whatever this is. Please sign in." They're sending a snippet of a phishing link to this device. Then in the phishing link, it has Okta because they knew that was their MFA provider, and they keep texting this person, "Hey, you need to do this, you need to do this," and eventually they wear them down to the point that they click the link. It takes them to a landing page, says, "Hey, enter your credentials." Okay, here are my credentials, and it says, "Hey, make sure you give us the one-time password we just sent to your device. Plug that in." So now, without them knowing it was a phishing link, it was a phishing page, they've now given away their credentials, and they've given away the one-time password used to authenticate them. So that they've essentially doubled down on this being the bad user. That was the entry point. So think about this happening on any sort of mobile device, not just an enterprise employee device, but on a consumer device. How tricky that was, and how easy that was for someone to steal that data, those credentials, and even the method used to authenticate them. So these mobile devices essentially become the Achilles heel to a lot of security solutions out there today. But device, network, phishing, apps, all the key vectors of attack on a mobile device. So as we start to talk about, and Andrew alluded to this earlier, these mobile applications that you're building and their healthcare applications, these apps are going to go run on a device. Knowing all of that stuff that we just talked about, these applications are going to go run on a device that you don't manage, and are essentially managed by the individual user of the phone who may be totally unaware and poor cybersecurity hygiene and awareness. And you're going to give access to potentially sensitive data via an app that runs on this device that you really aren't aware of the threats or risks on it. Neither is the person functioning the phone. And that application may permit access to sensitive data, which could be a breach of PII data, could be privacy issues beyond that, privacy fines, or that application could control a medical device connected to that person's body. Then the question is, well, how dangerous is that? It seems pretty dangerous. So consider all of those threats, and then think, okay, we're going to go give access to a mobile application on this person's device. So as we, Andrew, if you want to talk about this slide, I think maybe better I'll give the people a break from my voice.
No, and this is, security is a journey. There's a certain, Kevin Mitnick is one of the original old school hackers, right, who turned his powers for good at some point. But this is the playing field is, when you're playing defense, you've got to cover every hole. Whereas if you're playing offense, you just have to find one breach. And that's one of the things we want to focus on in the next couple of slides over the next couple of minutes is, the classic, kind of capture the flag or build the castle or, put up a bunch of walls and defense honestly isn't good enough anymore. What we would call a static defense, or, the walls and the defenses that you can put over your systems can't react quickly enough to the real world, because both your users are not under your control and you have people that don't have a sense of what they should do well. And so the app creator or the device creator has to anticipate everything and then have the ability to respond quickly. Oh, and also get likely through the FDA. That's just a relatively high hill to climb. And so one of the things that Zimperium does particularly well is give you the tools to aid in that, so that you can you can both tick all the boxes required for the normal stuff, as well as the ability to respond quickly.
Good point, Andrew. And I think we had a question in the chat. I think we'll do questions at the very end, and we'll keep pushing along here, and we'll get to the questions here quite shortly. Feel free to make any more questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to address those afterwards. So what we're looking at here is a pretty simplified view of application development timeline. And again, we're talking in the context of application or healthcare applications or applications connected to medical devices, because I think it adds a certain flavor to this whole scenario. And that is, typically when you're developing an application, you go through your app design and your development. Part of the app design is the security design of the application. And we say, okay, we're going to apply some obfuscation. We're going to encrypt our keys in some form or fashion. We're also going to add some anti-tampering, anti-reversing capabilities to this application using some of the solutions out there provided by vendors like Zimperium. That typically happens at that app compilation stage where we apply the security to the app binary. That security, traditionally is static. It takes the application build and it applies the protections to the application based upon the latest version of the security tool. And that security tool is up to date as of the past, let's say 3 months. So you're receiving a security solution from even a vendor like Zimperium, the latest version, where we've included the latest detections for the latest threats as we've seen them. And now it's being applied to your app binary 3 months later, and then your application goes through the process of release and paperwork, which goes to regulatory bodies such as the FDA, and then somewhere 3 to even 6 months later, your application reaches production. It's now published, it's now post-market. So in that amount of time from that development of what that app security tool's intended to do, which is protect your application, and to the point in time where it's released, you could have, let's say, minimum 6 months. Even if you brought it back to 3 months or even 1 month, depending on your typical release cycle and how long it takes you to get through some of these gates from regulatory bodies. Consider that length of time, then consider how many threats have we seen? How many threats did we see on our initial slide that had all of the headlines within 45 to 60 days? How many of those potentially could affect the security of your app? The question will come up for each and every single one of those. And if we're also considering 5,000 new pieces of malware samples detected daily, they think the question is not if your app is vulnerable upon release, it's a matter of how vulnerable. And then we know this is a cyclical process, but how quickly can you turn around a release, and how often are you doing that? And these ad hoc releases, how much time, how much money, and how many resources are put into making these fixes? It's a losing game, right? These traditional means of static protection applied to mobile applications, it's simply not enough from a security angle, but it's certainly affecting business processes as well. And so that is where a lot of the consideration is coming into play for how do we minimize that? How do we shrink that security gap from app protection tool getting the latest updates to me releasing an application to the wild? How do we cover off on all of those security vulnerabilities that are happening in that time period before release? How do we close that gap? I don't know if Andrew wants to make any other comments on that as well.
No, that was a pretty good tee up, and the answer is a good one, and I'm curious, Eric, if you want to sort of talk them through the answer of how Zimperium solves this problem, or gives you a significant leg up in this journey. We can kind of talk through that, because again, this is something we're actually doing with customers in market, products that have been in the space for a number of years, that have gone through cybersecurity reviews where the bar is quite high, as well as the bar over time, frankly, continues to get higher. And so you have to have both the right tools as well as methodology to manage risk and threats over time in the most safe and appropriate way. And so that's frankly, one of Imperium's core expertise is based on our 11 years of threat defense awareness and other things. And so you can sort of paint the picture of what dynamic response to threats looks like.
Absolutely. So let me jump ahead. So where the market is going, what we see is that there is a need for dynamic detection, moving past this static protection that we just described, that is still beneficial to some extent, right? I mean, some of these solutions, even like Imperium's Z-Shield solution, while it may be static in nature, it does provide these anti-reversing and anti-tampering capabilities that you can only get with that type of solution. I think that's valid. It's a hardening type solution. Let's protect this app. Let's make sure when we send it out there to the wild and into the store that someone can't download this application and not have any sort of barrier to entry when it comes to security breaches. We have to make that more difficult. We have to apply obfuscation. We have to try to set traps to stop bad actors from reversing these applications, and look for things like sensitive IP or code logic, or look for points of vulnerability to make injections, and look for things like cryptographic keys that may be exposed in the app. We have to make that harder. And so we're not saying there's not a need for those static protections. There's absolutely still a need. But then what more can we do? And that becomes this idea of dynamic protections or dynamic detections for an application. It's this idea or this concept of adding threat detection to your mobile application. Because again, you're going to put a mobile application, even if you bundle it up and make it real hardened and reinforce and send it out there to the wild, eventually it's going to get out of date. And it's going to run on a device where you have zero visibility. It's almost like you've made this thing real sturdy, but you also don't even know what's coming at you, right? There could be a bus barreling down the road about to hit you, but you don't have that visibility. And that's where this idea of, okay, let's add threat detection. Let's make our applications more security aware of what's happening out there. Is someone downloading your app and running it on an emulator? Is it running on a device that has malware on it? Is that device that you're running on connected to a bad network? All of these points of visibility and all these points of risk need to be addressed. And it's also, I like to consider that analogy of the bus coming down the road. Well, now, instead of just bracing yourself for impact and not knowing where it's coming from, now you see that. You see the malware on this device. You can start to take action earlier on, as opposed to saying, I'm now only taking action when my app is hit with some sort of hooking attempt. I also, it may be that I saw the network event that was happening on this device prior to the malware being delivered to this device, and that malware then intends to hook the application. That visibility further up the attack kill chain is actually going to become quite valuable to you, because you can start bracing yourself for what's to come next. You can start to take those remediation actions in order to get ahead of these things. And again, adding dynamic detection is not just around the static protection, or let's say signature-based detection methodologies like the traditional antivirus. These detection capabilities have to be based upon AI, has to be based upon ML, things that are detecting not by signature, but rather by behavior, to say, I don't need to know the name of this threat. I don't need to know the signature. I just need to know the effects of this threat on this device, such as an elevation or privilege on a mobile device, or system level tampering that would be emitted by any sort of threat that's happening. Those are the trigger points. Those are the symptoms of an attack happening on a device. And that's the level of which you needed to do detection, because that's what's going to shrink the gap. That's what's going to detect zero-day threats, not the detection of known threats and looking at a large database of signatures, rather saying, I can detect, even if I don't know this thing, even if I don't know the name of it, the signature, I know that when this threat is on the device, I can see the malicious activity. And now I know that there's a risk and I can start to take action. So having that type of detection, not just signature-based detection, but rather visibility of threats, even if there's 0 days, that's where the world of AppSec is going. That's where the world of mobile security is going in general. But applying it to applications, especially because these apps are going to run on devices that you don't manage, you need that level of visibility and security. It's the only way that's going to get ahead of or start to shrink that gap. It's always hard to say you're going to get ahead of, but it's the only way that's really going to start to shrink that gap of security coverage. Andrew.
Yeah, no, Eric really well said. That's this visibility of threat, or at least the awareness of what might be out there. I kind of liked your bus metaphor. It's like, it's pretty obvious if you're under threat from a big thing rolling down the street right at you. But I'll also say, to take that one a little farther, something like dynamic response maybe doesn't see the bus, but what it does is it hears it and it can feel the ground rumbling, and there's a sense of what's coming. And kind of the point of what we do with at least the product name that we would do this under is called ZDefend, is we learned that rumbling and noise and directionally based attack means something like a bus. Now maybe it's a bus and maybe it's a tractor, maybe it's a rock. The point is you're aware of it and you can respond to the threat. And specifically there at the very bottom, one of the amazing things about what you can do is you can actually, without changing the app from a FDA, you're not allowed to change your app unless you jump through these hoops sort of perspective, you can change the posture of your response to threat over the air. It's actually kind of like the old virus definition sort of thing, but you can change the posture model that lives in your app over the course of the life of your app, which is really amazing. Like this is something that people see, and when it's implemented in their world, they see that has really enormous value because it gives them the visibility, the awareness of threat, the response to threat, as well as the ability to protect against things they didn't even expect, which is kind of the definition of unknown threats in 0 days, right? That is a powerful thing. Yeah.
You bring up a great point, and something that I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm not sure if I would have forgot it or not, but yes, the idea of updating the SDK, and that's not, let's say, a full update or a new SDK version that goes out. That's essentially the SDK receiving new content to it over the air. And that's the important distinction, is that it's not changing the SDK that's part of the app that was submitted. It's not changing the app that's already been submitted and approved. It's rather just taking down the new content from the server to say, I'm now a little bit smarter and I didn't have to change anything in the app. I don't need to go back through regulatory processes because I didn't do anything. I didn't change anything structurally. I'm just now a little bit more aware, a little bit more secure than I was prior, which is super important, because again, you think about the rate of change of these threats. You think about how often you typically would have to react with a static solution. Now with these capabilities of 0 day detection and the ability to update over the air, now you're saying, well, I don't need to do all of these ad hoc releases due to my static protection nature. My app is generally secure against 0 day threats, and my SDK does receive new content from the network, from the server, that says I'm now smarter, and it's going to help you save time, money, and resources from this, the reaction to ad hoc releases for new security updates, because you were doing it as in a static protection mechanism. So yeah, that's super, super important.
Let me actually go ahead. We actually had a question put in. Let me see if I can address some of those. And some of it is about the threats between iOS and Android. And sometimes first of all, the numbers are a little bit old. We do have a new release. And to the person who wrote in, we'd be happy to get you that as it comes out. We also can drill a little deeper into those numbers if there's some specific awareness of like, well, why are there more threats that have been exploited on iOS versus Android? Or, help us understand what that is. I will say, and related to that question is, again, this is like, you can use a hammer for good or a hammer for evil, right? It's how do you use a tool? And it's true that a lot of the technology that Zimperium creates and has is AI and ML and all the other buzzwords that are around. But it's also our business for the last 11 years is being the world leader in mobile threat defense. And so our models and our labs and our cryptographers and our researchers intend to always stay as the top of the field against all threats. Now, this is a challenge. This is an ongoing, you can call it a cat and mouse, or, if you give better tools to the attackers, that makes the defenders also need to get better. I will say, as someone who's been in this business for a number of years, there can be some back and forth, sure. But that's why we think the strength of our research, got a bunch of patents, and like this is the core technology inside the top mobile threat defense products worldwide that you can put in your app. So we have both very high expectations and standards to make this be world-class. That's a little bit, and again, I have a lot of conversations with security folks where they say, I hear the words that you're saying, but I need to see it for myself. And this is certainly something that you can examine and implement. I will just say, from well, what does it take to get if you buy into the idea of dynamic threat response in apps, the implementation of this is really straightforward. This is an SDK that gets wired up, dropped in. It's not a heavy lift. I'll also say it's not a heavy lift to get a level of awareness without having to respond to that awareness, if that makes sense. So we work with a lot of companies that say, we agree our application is relatively dumb. We have static protections. There is not signals coming back from it. It's just released. Let's solve that problem. You can solve that problem by implementing some solutions that just start to report back to give you the knowledge and visibility that you were previously unaware of. And then the business can decide, hey, it's great to just get this information, or we can choose to act on this information. And then you can determine what your response is to those particular threats. And so, at least to the person who was asking the question, it sounds like you've been thinking fairly deeply on this. We'd love to have a further conversation about that. But it is an interesting space, but it's both very exciting to be able to offer some of these solutions into the marketplace. So, Eric, I think did we have one more slide, or is this the last one?
We do, and there was another question, and you may have covered it. I'll add just a couple points. There was a question around, next generation app security, runtime protection, the use of ML and AI. And then the question was attackers and malactors likely using same or similar type methodologies to increase their attacks, right, or increase the efficacy of their attacks. And then this idea of this cat and mouse game and the shifting of the paradigm. What I would say is that those things, attackers or malactors they're already doing those things. And that is why we're calling for the need for a change. That's why there's the need for next gen runtime defense capabilities for applications, because malactors have already moved to this idea that they can use their machine to effectively create more lethal attacks and do them more so at scale. And so we can't apply these signature-based static protections to applications anymore. For that reason, we have to apply AI and ML the same way that they are doing. It's this idea of fighting with machine speed, or using one machine to fight another one. We have to do the same. So I would say, in response to the question, is that that's already happening on the bad actor side, and now we're responding. It's more so we're coming to the table to say we're here to fight with our AI and ML, because that's already happening against us. And then the comment around the difference between iOS vulnerabilities disclosed versus Android, and why that number is so different, even if the Android population is larger. It's a great question, because everyone, I think, up to this point, or even still today, are led to believe that iOS is safer. And in some ways, yes, I think you could argue yes or maybe, that being Android's an open platform versus iOS being a bit more controlled. But as a security person, I look at this idea of a bit more control, but it's not controlled by me, it's controlled by the manufacturer. And this idea of, let's say, walled gardens. Well, when I hear walled gardens, I think dark corners. I think inability to see things. I think lack of visibility is going to do me more harm than good. I need to know what I'm up against, especially as an enterprise. I'm going to use a commercially off-the-shelf device. I'm going to try to bolt on as many things as possible. But ultimately, this device being designed by a manufacturer, and it's a consumer device, how do I make it enterprise grade? Maybe it's better for me that this other Android device, is more on an open platform, because there's more things that I can do for it. That it's a bit of philosophy. It almost becomes a philosophy discussion in the end, but it is an interesting topic. But again, walled gardens, dark corners, lack of visibility, I think, hurts you in the end. So I know we're coming up on time. Maybe just one more slide, jump ahead. So when we think about the maturity model of AppSec, this may even, I think I saw that there was a question coming up too. This may even answer it. I haven't looked too deeply at it yet, but mobile application, security, where to start. This idea and concept of scanning has been around for a while. I'd say by this point in time, table stakes. The same thing with, hey, secure your code and secure your keys. That stuff, especially apps that operate, that give access to sensitive data. Most likely, they're already doing these things. It's okay. Well, first, let's scan our application, let's scan our code, let's make sure there's no vulnerabilities while we're developing it before we release it to production. Everyone understands this idea of shifting security left into the development lifecycle. That's DevSecOps really in a nutshell. The other aspect is, okay, well, if I'm going to give access to sensitive data or encrypted data, likely going to use cryptographic keys to permit access to that data. Well, if we're going to store keys at the edge or in the application, how are we securing those keys? There has to be an understanding of that, and there cannot be keys exposed. And how are they going to go find those keys? Well, they're going to try to rip apart your code. They're going to try to rip apart your app. So how do you protect that app code? How do you make the app code harder to decipher, to find vulnerabilities in? How do you create more of a barrier to entry to slow down hackers, if not stop them completely from getting to that point of looking for vulnerabilities? And then what is really those last two pillars, this idea of next-gen defense, adding threat visibility to your application, adding, or making self-defending applications. That is where we're heading. And as we see it, table stakes with scanning, key protection and code protection, but the next level is add threat detection, add runtime defense with threat reporting capabilities. Andrew, feel free to add in on top. I just know we're up at time, so I wanted to get that out.
Yeah, no, thanks for sort of talking through that. We did get another comment, and the one thing we haven't covered today, and maybe this is a good jump off point for where we'd like to go from here. For those of you that have expressed some significant interest, we'd love to walk you through this in a more detailed way. One of the things we haven't talked about is, well, what is our dynamic solution talking to on the back end? And that's something we call Z Console. Here it's Imperium, everything here starts with a Z. So the Z Console is the place where you can get those notification or details, reports of what's happening to your apps in near real time. And so if the idea is like, hey, great, I want to implement this, I want to see if I'm getting attacked, what are those attacks? Are they something I've seen before? Is it something new? How should I respond? All of that, we would love to walk you through how you do that in Z Console, because you both can set a posture based on a variety of criteria and then submit a sort of standard response, and you can have other responses based on what you're learning with your application. So I think the short answer to the question of the gentleman that just put in a couple of minutes ago is we can show you how that's done. It's really straightforward. Again, this is both something that's being used in the medical space, but it is also heavily used in the banking space. And they also have a very refined need to be aware of things like threats of fraud and account takeover and things like that. And so we have both cutting edge on the banking and money side, as well as the protecting of the humans and medical device side. And those come together in a single product where both can benefit. And so hopefully I answered your question. But if there's any additional questions, please put them into the notes right now. We want to be aware of everyone's time, but if there are additional questions, we will definitely circle back with you to ensure that you get the complete answer. And if you'd like an opportunity to walk through this product with you, we'd be happy to take you through it. Any final comments from you, Eric?
Nothing for me. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's hung on for the webinar. We appreciate you taking the time to hear what we have to say. And, again, to reiterate what Andrew said, we're here to help, happy to answer any other questions. We'll do some follow-up with everyone who's joined, and just see where we can provide some value for you.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.